The morning air in Solstice Valley was calm and cool. The mist rolled across the vineyard like a soft white blanket, and Marcus Thornfield stood among the rows of grapes with pruning shears in his hand, his dog Barl at his side, the quiet of the valley wrapping around them like an old friend. Then came the sound that broke everything, the sound of sirens drifting through the stillness like a warning bell from far away, growing louder with each second. Shaking the peace of dawn, Marcus lifted his head, his heart steady but his mind sharp. He had heard many sounds in his life, the busy rush of San Francisco traffic, the echo of courtroom arguments, the whispers of betrayal when his old life fell apart. But this sound was different. This was the sound of intrusion, of authority. Moving closer, of trouble walking straight into his vineyard. At the edge of the vine stood Delilah Hartwell, the HOA president, dressed in her white suit that gleamed even in the morning haze, her phone raised high as she filmed the scene with a satisfied smile on her painted lips. She looked like a queen inspecting her conquest, believing that today would mark the end of Marcus's vineyard. Her nails tapped against her phone case like impatient drums. Her perfume floated on the breeze. A sharp contrast to the earthy smell of grapes and soil. Two officers appeared from the road, their boots crunching on fallen leaves, radios crackling with static, faces unreadable. They moved with the practiced steps of men used to being obeyed. Their eyes scanned the land, the barn, the rows of vines, and then rested on Marcus, who stood tall and unflinching, his shears still in his hand, his dog alert beside him. Delilah's smile grew wider, as if victory was already hers. She had called these officers, believing that power and law were weapons she could bend at will. She wanted Marcus gone, his vineyard silent, his land ready to be swallowed by her husband's developments. She imagined headlines in the local paper: HOA president saves neighborhood from nuisance vineyard. She thought she had cornered a simple farmer, but what she did not know was that Marcus was far from simple, and the land she wanted to erase carried secrets older than her entire community. Marcus breathed in slowly, his eyes calm. He remembered the first time he stepped on this vineyard after his life had shattered, after the divorce that had stripped him bare, after leaving the towering glass buildings of San Francisco behind. This land had felt like healing, like home, like a second chance. He had promised himself he would guard it with everything he had. Because it was more than soil and vines. It was legacy. It was his grandfather's gift. It was history carved into every row. The officers stopped before him, one clearing his throat, the other glancing at Delilah, who kept her phone raised high. As though filming a trophy hunt, Marcus tilted his head and gave them a steady look. Inside he could feel the anger that Delilah had stirred for months, but he did not show it. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him shaken. Barl growled low, his ears sharp, his body tense, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus laid a hand on the dog's head, grounding them both. He knew this moment was important. He knew. Eyes were on him, cameras ready, neighbors whispering behind curtains, waiting to see the farmer humiliated. But Marcus also knew something else, something Delilah had no idea about, something the police officers would soon discover: the land under his boots was not ordinary property. It was protected by rights that went back decades, rights that no HOA president could erase, rights that made her entire attack nothing more than a game of smoke and mirrors. Delilah shifted her stance, her confidence spilling out in the way she lifted her chin. She whispered loudly enough for neighbors to hear, saying, "This vineyard breaks rules. This vineyard lowers our values. This vineyard does not belong here." Her words cut the air like knives sharpened with envy and greed. But Marcus did not flinch. He let her perform. He let her stage her play, because the end of her act was already written. Though she could not see it, the officers finally spoke, asking Marcus about the complaints, about the vineyard operations, about the claims of violations, their voices formal but uncertain. Marcus answered with patience, his tone calm, each word steady like stones placed in a foundation. He explained nothing in detail yet, because timing mattered, suspense mattered. Letting the opponent believe victory was close made the reversal even sweeter. Delilah laughed lightly. A sharp, brittle sound. She told the officers this man thinks he is above the law. This man believes old dirt matters more than community standards. She spoke as though she had already won, but Marcus only let the corners of his mouth rise in. A faint smile, a smile that carried weight, a smile that said you are playing a game you cannot win in that moment. With police standing in the vineyard, with Delilah holding her phone like a sword, with neighbors watching from behind curtains, Marcus looked around at the land that stretched wide, vines glowing under the soft morning sun, rows reaching beyond the mist, hills rolling like waves of green, and he thought to himself, "This is more than mine, this is the valley itself. This is power she cannot touch." The officers glanced between Delilah and Marcus, their posture shifting as if something invisible pressed upon them. And though Delilah still smiled, deep in her chest a crack had begun, small and quiet, but real. Because somewhere behind Marcus's calm eyes lay a truth far greater than any HOA letter, a truth that would soon turn her confidence into fear, a truth that whispered of ownership beyond her imagination, the truth that Marcus Thornfield did. Not just own a vineyard, he owned the valley. The vineyard stood quiet after the police left. Their boots had pressed marks in the dirt that would fade with the sun, but their questions still echoed. Delilah had walked away with her phone held high, still believing she was in control, yet Marcus remained calm. Because inside his mind rested truths that no one around him could guess, truths shaped by years in another world. Far from the soil and grapes of Solstice Valley, everyone in the neighborhood thought Marcus was only a farmer, a man who lived with his dog and worked the vines because he had no other choice. But they were wrong. They saw his flannel shirts and weathered boots and believed the story ended there. Yet beneath that simple image was a man who once wore expensive suits and carried a briefcase worth more than a tractor. A man who spoke in courtrooms and battled corporate sharks every day. A man who once billed $400 an hour for his words alone years earlier. Marcus had been a corporate lawyer in San Francisco. His office sat high above the city, the view filled with steel and glass towers that glittered in the sunlight. He worked endless hours drafting contracts and negotiating deals worth millions. He thrived on adrenaline and victory, the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside, but like wine with hidden bitterness. It carried poison underneath, the poison of betrayal, the poison of loss. Marcus had been married then, his wife elegant and charming, his life polished like the shoes he wore to work each day, but comfort turned to chaos when betrayal cut through. His world, his wife had chosen another man, not just anyone, but his own law partner. The wound was deep and the divorce ruthless. Everything he had built slipped through his fingers. Bank accounts drained, apartment emptied, pride shattered. In the end, he was left with little more than his name and a heart heavy with scars. When his grandfather passed away, leaving behind the old vineyard in Solstice Valley, Marcus had stood at a crossroads. He could stay in the city, fighting battles that no longer fed his soul. Or he could return to the land that had once been his childhood playground, a place of summer mornings and grape-stained hands. He chose the vineyard, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. Here the vines did not lie, here the soil gave back what you offered it. Here a man could rebuild himself from nothing. The farmhouse was old. Its floors groaned like tired bones. Its windows rattled in the wind, but to Marcus it felt alive, each sound reminding him of his grandfather, who had walked those halls, each creak echoing with memory. Outside the land stretched wide. 40 acres of rolling vines, irrigation lines as old as the Carter administration, tractors rusting like forgotten soldiers, yet under the neglect lay promise. Promise of life, promise of healing, promise of redemption. Every dawn Marcus walked among the vines, dew clinging to leaves, the air fresh with earth and growth. He felt something new stir inside him, something he had never found in boardrooms or court filings. Peace, a peace that grew slowly, like vines winding their way toward the sun. His German shepherd Barl ran freely, barking at trucks, chasing birds, guarding the land with loyalty that no human could match. Together they began a new life, a simpler life, but one rooted in strength. But peace never lasts when greed circles like vultures. Delilah Hartwell had arrived with her Escalade and her clipboard, declaring herself queen of the valley. Her husband Preston had been buying land piece by piece, turning farmland into blocks of beige houses that rose like empty monuments. To them, Marcus's vineyard was an obstacle, an eyesore, a target. They did not see heritage. They saw profit. They did not smell grapes. They smelled money, and Delilah had made it her mission to break Marcus down. She began with complaints. Then came the letters, thick envelopes stamped with threats, words designed to frighten ordinary people into surrender. But Marcus was not ordinary. What Delilah had not realized was that Marcus carried a weapon sharper than her petitions, a mind trained in the very laws she thought she could use against him. For 15 years he had fought real estate battles on a corporate scale, and though his suits were gone and his ties replaced by worn shirts, the skill had not vanished. It lived inside him. Waiting one evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, old documents spread out before him, the air filled with the scent of coffee and dust. His grandfather's papers stacked high, deeds yellowed with age, contracts written by hand, maps of the valley traced in fading ink. He read line by line, each word a thread, weaving a story of land and law. And then he found it, a manila folder marked important keep forever. Inside lay a secret powerful enough to silence any HOA, a president, a legal shield crafted decades before the papers spoke of perpetual farming rights, written in the deed of 1962, words that declared the land would remain agricultural, protected no matter what suburban dreams tried to swallow it. Marcus smiled, not with arrogance, but with certainty. This was the ace he needed, the card Delilah never expected him to hold. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice whispering, "Stand firm, protect the land, never bow to greed." In that moment, Marcus knew the fight had only just begun, and he was ready. He leaned back, the old farmhouse groaning around him, Barl stretched at his feet, the night outside filled with the soft song of crickets. Marcus felt a spark inside, a fire not of rage but of justice. Delilah thought she was playing with a farmer, but what she had awakened was something far more dangerous, a lawyer with nothing left to lose, a man who understood both soil and statutes, a man who would not only defend his vineyard, but expose the rot hidden behind her perfect smile and polished nails. And so, as the valley slept under the blanket of stars, Marcus prepared, his mind sharpened, his heart steady, his vineyard whispering promises of resilience. The war had started, and Delilah Hartwell had no idea that she had just declared battle against the wrong man. Tomorrow would bring new conflict. Tomorrow would bring louder attacks. But Marcus was no longer just a farmer. He was the guardian of the valley, and his past had armed him with everything he needed. The morning sun rose higher over Solstice Valley, painting the vineyard in warm gold. Marcus worked with sweat on his brow and determination in his heart. He was repairing the old fence that had guarded his family's land for decades. The wood had rotted, the posts leaned like tired soldiers, so he decided to rebuild it strong and tall, 6 feet high, sturdy enough to keep deer out and wedding guests safe. A fence that honored the vineyard's needs, not the whims of neighbors who had arrived only yesterday. In the grand story of the crown story of the valley, the sound of hammering carried across the hills, and soon came the sharp slam of a car door. It echoed through the rows of vines like a gunshot. Marcus looked up and saw her, Delilah Hartwell, marching across the dirt path like a general on the warpath, her white suit spotless, her heels sinking into the soil with every angry step, clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. She stopped at the fence line, her shadow stretching across the earth, her lips pursed tight as if she had swallowed vinegar. "That fence violates our community guidelines," she declared, her voice slicing through the air. She held her clipboard up like it carried the authority of kings. Her words dripped with arrogance, with the smugness of someone who believed no one could defy her. She told Marcus that rules were rules, and that standards must be maintained. She spoke as if she owned the valley itself, as if 40 acres of history could be erased by her suburban laws. Marcus leaned on his shovel, his face calm though his hands were tired. He met her gaze without flinching. He reminded her gently that his vineyard had stood here for 60 years, long before her houses, long before her rules, long before her clipboard ever existed. He told her the land was his legacy, his grandfather's sweat soaked into the soil, his own hands carrying on that work. But Delilah only scoffed, her laugh sharp and hollow. She said rules do not care about legacy. Rules are rules, honey, and she turned on her heel, her Escalade door slamming behind her like thunder. 2 days later the letter arrived, thick and official, its weight heavy with threats. The envelope carried the mark of authority, bold letters screaming cease and desist. It accused Marcus of building unauthorized agricultural structures. It demanded he stop his vineyard operations or face $500 in daily fines. Worse still, copies had been sent to the county inspector, his bank, even the local newspaper. This was no neighborly complaint. This was warfare dressed in paperwork. A strike meant to crush him before he could even fight back. Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the letter spread open before him, the farmhouse, walls creaking softly as the wind moved through the valley. He felt the sting of rage rise in his chest, yet alongside it came the fire of resolve. Delilah thought he was just a farmer with no defense, but she had forgotten his past, forgotten his years in corporate battles, forgotten that he once lived in a world where paper was sharper than swords. And he smiled, because he knew her mistake. She had underestimated him, and that would be her undoing. Barl lay at his feet, tail thumping softly, as if the dog too understood that the real fight had just begun. Marcus thought of his grandfather, of the promise he had made to guard the vineyard, to keep the land safe from vultures dressed as neighbors. He folded the letter carefully, not with fear, but with intention. He would not crumble. Instead, he would prepare. For he knew the law better than Delilah could ever imagine. And within that law lay his shield and his sword. Delilah, however, did not slow down. She moved quickly, filing complaints, whispering to county officials, calling in favors from her days on the city council. Her husband Preston backed her moves, eager to see the vineyard fall. Together they painted Marcus as a lawbreaker, a nuisance, a stubborn relic clinging to a past that no longer fit their vision. They believed the weight of their influence would corner him, force him to sell, force him to surrender. But the valley itself seemed to resist them. The vines swayed in the breeze like silent allies, the land humming with resilience. The neighbors began to murmur, some swayed by Delilah's tailies, others unsure. Whispers spread at the market, in the post office, in the quiet corners of town. Questions about trucks, about noise, about whether the vineyard belonged anymore. Marcus heard the whispers, but he kept working, trimming vines, repairing irrigation, walking the land with steady steps. His silence was not weakness, it was patience. Patience for the right moment. Patience to let Delilah weave her own trap tighter and tighter until she was caught in it herself. At night Marcus returned to his grandfather's documents, flipping through deeds and permits, legal words that most would find dry and dull. But to him they sang like music. Each phrase another stone in the wall that would shield his vineyard, each clause another sword edge sharpened for battle. And when he found the lines about perpetual farming rights, when he read those words again under the dim light of his kitchen lamp, he knew beyond all doubt that Delilah was walking toward her own downfall. The fence still stood tall in the morning sun, its posts firm, its wire strong. It was more than wood and metal. It was a symbol now, a line in the soil that divided truth from greed, heritage from arrogance. Marcus walked along it, hand brushing the cool wire, Barl trotting beside him, the vineyard stretching endlessly behind. He felt no fear, only readiness. Because the war had started, and though Delilah thought she had power, she had no idea who she was really facing. And so the valley held its breath, waiting, watching. As the simple fence became the spark that lit a fire no one could put out, Delilah thought she had won, but in truth, she had only awakened the storm that would change everything. The night was heavy with silence as Marcus sat in his farmhouse kitchen, the old wooden table covered with stacks of papers and faded folders. A single lamp burned above him, casting a warm circle of light over documents that smelled of dust and memory. Outside the crickets sang, and the wind moved through the vines like whispers of the past. Barl rested by his feet, but his ears twitched every time Marcus turned a page. The dog, sensing that something important was unfolding, Marcus had received another letter that day, this one even more threatening, claiming that his vineyard was a danger to the community, claiming that trucks, weddings, and deliveries were breaking laws, claiming he was ruining the peace of Solstice Heights. Delilah's voice almost echoed from the words, sharp and dripping with arrogance. But Marcus did not feel fear. Instead, he felt the old instincts of his former life rise inside him. Instincts sharpened by 15 years of legal battles in towering city offices. Instincts that told him to look deeper, to dig until truth rose like gold from the dirt. He opened the manila folder, marked important keep forever. The same folder his grandfather had carefully tucked away decades before. Inside were deeds, contracts, letters, and maps, each one carrying the weight of history, each one a piece of armor his grandfather had left behind. Marcus read slowly, his eyes scanning every line, his lawyer mind awakening with each clause. And signature, and then he found it again. The powerful words that Delilah could never erase. The perpetual farming rights granted in 1962. Words that declared the vineyard as protected land, land shielded from suburban rules, land that could never be silenced by any HOA president. His heart beat steady as he read those lines aloud. His voice low but filled with strength. Barl lifted his head as if he too understood the meaning. Marcus realized that his grandfather had been wiser than anyone knew. He had seen the future pressures, the hunger of developers, the greed that would try to swallow farmland. And so he had locked protections into the very foundation of the vineyard, protections that could stand against the likes of Delilah Hartwell and her husband Preston. But Marcus knew a deed alone would not stop her. Delilah was not fighting fair. She had turned neighbors against him with whispers and lies. She had painted him as a troublemaker. She had even tried to reach the local paper with her twisted version of events. Her influence was poison, and it spread quickly. If he was to win this battle, he needed more than old words on paper. He needed strategy, patience, and allies, and he knew exactly where to begin. The next morning the valley glowed with fresh sunlight. As Marcus drove to town, he carried copies of the deed, notes he had written, and questions that only careful searching could answer. At the courthouse he walked through narrow halls lined with filing cabinets that smelled of ink and age. He asked for records, permits, and zoning files. The clerks raised their brows at the farmer in worn boots. But when he spoke with the confidence of a trained lawyer, their doubts melted and the papers came forth. Stack after stack Marcus spent hours in that courthouse, flipping through dusty records, tracing signatures, connecting dates, his eyes burning but his determination fierce. And there he found more, not just the farming rights, but surveys, easements, and old rulings that strengthened his case like steel beams under stone. Each page another nail in the coffin of Delilah's schemes. Each discovery another spark of victory waiting to ignite. Meanwhile, Delilah doubled her attacks. She created a Facebook group called Concerned Neighbors of Solstice Valley, where she posted twisted photos of Marcus's tractors, claiming they were dangerous machines, where she complained about flies and noise, where she painted the vineyard as a threat to children and families. Neighbors who once waved at Marcus now looked away. Store owners who once chatted now stayed silent. The poison worked its way through the valley, but Marcus did not bend. He knew lies could spread like wildfire, but truth, when revealed, could burn hotter and brighter at night. Marcus returned home exhausted, but alive with focus. His kitchen table became a battlefield. Documents spread like weapons, coffee steaming beside them, He remembered his old law professor's words. When someone tries to bury you in paperwork, bury them back but deeper, and that was exactly what he intended to do. He was building not only a defense, but an attack, a strategy that would not only silence Delilah, but expose the rot behind her every move. He thought of Preston too. The developer husband always in the shadows, the man who built beige castles for profit, the man whose fortune depended on swallowing land like a shark swallows prey. Marcus realized this was bigger than Delilah's personal grudge. This was about money, millions of dollars hiding behind false smiles and false complaints. And that meant they would not stop easily. But it also meant they had made mistakes. Greed always left tracks. And he would find them. Barl barked suddenly at the sound of a car outside. Marcus peeked through the window. The night was calm, but his instincts sharpened. Paranoia whispered, reminding him that he was not just in a property dispute. He was in a war against people who played dirty. But instead of fear, he felt resolve. He would record everything, document every move, and prepare. Because when the time came, he would not only defend his vineyard, he would strike. The valley itself seemed to stand with him. The vines swaying in evening wind, the air carrying the sweet smell of ripening grapes. Marcus looked across the rows, glowing under moonlight, and he made a silent vow. Delilah had chosen the wrong man. She thought she was breaking a farmer, but she had awakened a lawyer armed with the land's deepest secrets, secrets that would soon turn her victory into defeat. The war was only beginning, and Marcus was ready for the next move.